So a lot of our thoughts are on the Tate Library. And with the changes that are coming to the Tate, what will they look like? Where will the Tate Library go when the Tate Library itself is being reconstructed? Which set me to wondering about how we got to the Tate Library in the first place and what the Tate Library represents in this community. And in some ways, one of the famous lines around the Fieldston School is, "From the classroom to the world." In some ways, they're representations of the Tate Library in all of our classrooms, but in particular, this little artifact. If you glance at that picture, that's the original Fieldston School Library. The school library of 1928, but also the school library from 1928 all the way through 1969. And what I'm going to do right now is take you upstairs in the 100s building from my classroom, room 112, into the original library, the original school library. Let's go up there. So you're opening this door and you're walking into the space, and here's the marvelous space. So this is the student faculty lounge, and you can see some of the changes that have been made, but so much of it is familiar. It's crucial that it remain familiar. So you've got these wonderful windows, even though it's a cloudy day where it's about to snow, but they are splashing this place with light. They built a little bit of a stage over here for performances. They've created some cozy spaces to sit, but if you look over at the west end, you can see it's the same space, and you could see that why, in the 1960s, it was becoming crowded. Class sizes at Fieldston were growing. They needed more books to accommodate. The knowledge industry was expanding, and in a sense, this is when the architects were called in to construct the Tate. Okay. Everybody knows grassy banks and wooded ways. So here we are in the grassy banks portion of the song, but the wooded ways is up there. The wooded ways is now the Tate Library. So for the original graduations of the school from the 1920s all the way through the 1960s, that was a woods. And when students graduated, they would assemble up there in the wood, and then they would make their way down as part of the processional. That becomes impossible after a certain point, but it also becomes the perfect location for the school library. And it sits up above the rest of the school, but it also opens up to the rest of the school. So in some ways it partially closes the quad, but it opens you up to all of the wonderful light that's on the quad, all the wonderful space that's on the quad, but also the fact that the school itself is a work of art. So when you make your way to the Tate Library, you're very much aware of the artistry and the artisanal qualities and the architectural designs and some of the larger considerations that go into the making of a library and the location of a library. But it also puts you in touch with the roots of the school and the importance of the arts of the school. So you can take the outside path and look at architecture and look at landscape architecture, but also to look at the placement of art on the campus itself. So this little fellow over here is a manifestation of the art department, and as we go up to the Tate, there'll be other subtly placed works of art, like the Hands Project created by Isabel Rosenthal all those years ago. But if you do the indoor route to get to the Tate, you're also mindful of art. So let's imagine it's a rainy day or it's snowing. Let's take the indoor route. And the indoor route puts us in the art galleries. We have our ceramics rooms, but we also have something current that's on display. So the journey to the Tate is filled with kind of this visual stimulation. Let's go directly to the Tate. When you come to this cold hallway, in a sense it's the prelude, and there's something unresolved about it between that art building and the Tate Library. It has a new door, it's always freezing, but at the same time, it's a favorite place from people from the art studios to come out where they want to paint the campus. How are you? Thank you so much. So you come into the Tate, and you're literally on the ground floor. And the first thing you realize is that you're mindful of art going through the building. You're mindful of art when you're out on the quad. But on the ground floor of the Tate, you're also keenly aware of art because it's also an exhibition space. The Tate can be used for performing arts. The Tate can be used for the plastic arts. The Tate is for the visual arts. Currently, there's a combination of ceramics and photography. But in a sense, it gets you in the mood. It gets you in the mood for what you're going to discover up there. So when you're in the Tate, you're in one of the great public spaces at the Fieldston School. So it's a public space, and it's open, and you never know who you're going to encounter, and that's part of the delight, but you're also impressed by the way it unfolds to you. So you arrive, and you have the sense of there's the east, and there is the west. And no matter where you sit, right, in the library, you have that sense of the sun going over you over the course of the day. You're here, you'll select a table, lots of opportunities over there, but probably a class going on right now. Concentrated activity, maybe one of the language teachers. And one of the things that you can see is that you have room for a class, but also individualized research. Some days the place is so busy, you'll have several classes going on simultaneously. One of the things that I love is that at any point after you've been studying, if you need to just stand up because you're a little restless, maybe you want to see what your friends are doing, you make your way over to the window, which overlooks the quad. And a slight change in location is everything. In some ways, a temptation in the 500s or the 400s or the 200s building would be to pull you into the quad, right? Everything's on the same plane. The great thing about the Tate is that you're above it. You can either go down and join, or you can stay apart from it. Use the time to think. Use the time to plan. Use the time to study. Use the time to collaborate with people on a project. Use the time to reflect. Use the time to understand the inner workings of the library. But if you want to see what your friends are doing, if you hear some interesting noises, make your way over to the window and have that wonderful decision to stay or to go. If you decide to stay, one of my favorite things, and it really is the first thing that I bring my 9th grade students to see. I bring them up to the library, introduce them to the librarians, give them a sense of the space just visually. But then it's the library in miniature. It's the reference section of a library in miniature. Everything that'll give you access to the larger collection really begins here, and it's kind of a specialized kind of knowledge that the librarians do a wonderful job of introducing you to. So if you come over here is the reference section. And what's great about the reference section, at least according to the Dewey Decimal System, is that it begins with those zeros and it makes its way all the way through the 900s. It begins with general considerations, about knowledge and about how we learn and about philosophy. So at the very beginning of this, you start in the reference section with a consideration of what is wisdom and how do you acquire wisdom. So you might turn to the Encyclopedia of Philosophy, or you might turn to a dictionary of the history of ideas. And then you can make your journey through the world of religion, through the world of myth, whether it's Judaism, whether it's Islam, right? So understanding myth and history, faith and fable, and then making your way into social dynamics. As we go into the 300s, right? It's this unfolding sense of the social forces at work, and you have all of the appropriate reference works to guide you as a startup point in the knowledge that you acquire. You can make your way through the 300s, through the maths and sciences of the 400s, 500s, and 600s, to the arts of the 700s, the world of literature in the 800s, and the world of history. And the great thing about history, and where it's placed here, is that history loves to steal from all of the other disciplines. So think of these 900s as a culmination. And your thoughts about wisdom, and how the mind thinks, and who you are, and where you stand in the universe, in a sense, when you're standing here, it's a moment to sort of put all of it together. Your journey has allowed you now to put it all together and to locate it and to locate you in time.
Good child?
Except that. Yeah.
This be a direction?
So I arrived at Fieldston in the fall of 1985. I didn't have a permanent classroom I was assigned to. I didn't have a desk. What do you do? Where do you go? Where do you put your books? The librarian at the time, head librarian, wonderful person, Judy Nosselson, came over to me and said, you know, the library is a great place to work. She pointed out this location, and I've been at this location ever since. This is what I consider sort of my desk, my home away from home. This is the place where I come every single day to meet with students, to plan lessons, to read papers, to grade papers, to write home reports, to talk to people with cameras. What's great about this is that because I teach in the history department and the literature department, it locates me right next to the history department. But it also allows me to have this sensation, right, of spaces, and it allows me to sort of see students. Are my students coming up to the library to do their work? Is there a student who needs some advice? People know that they can always find me in the library when I'm not teaching, in the same way they can always find Annette Starr in the library when she's not teaching. There are certain teachers who, you know, in a very real sense, see a crucial part of who they are, right? As folks who function not only in the classroom, but in a library as well. And in the library, one of the things they can do is they can meet with their students, go over assignments. It's a way of introducing them to new books, to new ideas. And it's a way also of making that link, right, between the world of printed literature and the electronic databases that the school has acquired over the years. So you may see books on the shelves, but you also have to understand that you have internet access. And the great thing about the internet access is really not the internet itself, but it's the librarians and the way they guide you through the materials. What's reliable, what's good, what's going to help you best. The same way, they help the teachers. Everything that we do in our classroom has a dimension that's manifested in the library. Books that we need, the librarians very often have picked in advance for us. They anticipate our needs, they consult us about what we're teaching, they ask us for lists, but there are these moments when they're just ahead of the curve. So for example, there's several books, there's several things we work with in interdisciplinary senior seminar. And one of the things is quantum mechanics. And one of the historians that we trust is this wonderful fellow, David Cassidy. long before we ever put in the request to get books by David Cassidy on Werner Heisenberg, the librarians already had it as part of the collection. So what is this collection all about? Because in some ways, the last part of this for me is the most important. The Tate Library is usually one of the first things that you see and that you want to see when you come onto the Fieldston campus. If there's a tour going on, they bring people to the Tate. If there's a special guest coming onto campus, they bring people to the Tate. So if you're the poet Billy Collins and you're spending the day at Fieldston and you're going to read from your poetry on the Fieldston stage, the first place you ask to see is the Tate Library. And you ask, of course, do you have my books of poetry? And of course, the Tate Library has all of your books of poetry. If you are the historian of the Holocaust, Deborah Lipstadt, and you're giving a talk in one of the history and literature classes, first thing you want to see is the Tate Library. And you pose the same question. Do you have my books? We have all the books. Would you like me to sign books? And the librarians say yes. And in a funny way, we have a lot of signed copies that go back to the 1920s. And some of the folks who have signed those copies include lots of prominent literary figures from the time of the Harlem Renaissance. So everyone from County Cullen to Richard Wright to Langston Hughes, they have signed copies in this library. It's pretty remarkable. It's a great secret. Shh, don't tell too many folks. But you also have lots of Fieldston authors. And the other funny thing about books is that very often in the books you'll have the names of Fieldston families who've contributed a book to the library. So if you open a cover, you might see the Herman Jervis Fund. So Herman Jervis and his wife started down at the Agricultural School. Their children went to the school. Their grandchildren went to the school. And currently their great-grandchildren are going to the school. And what's marvelous about that is all you have to do is open up a book and see that name. And in some ways, it's the history of the school itself unfolding in front of you. Final association, Tim O'Brien. Tim O'Brien comes to the Fieldston School. What does he want to see after he smokes a cigarette outside of the cafeteria? Tim wants to see the library. And he goes through the collection. He signs his books. But he also comes over to the Vietnam section. And there's this moment, when O'Brien is standing in front of the books. And it's almost like he's at the Vietnam Memorial. There's an entire history of Vietnam and the Vietnam War. And in some ways, it represents the different generations of scholarship that are out there. Older works as well as the latest works. And it's kind of profound for O'Brien to fall into a meditative state from the place that he covered, right, that he experienced first as a foot soldier, but then as a novelist, then as someone who writes short stories. And the final thing is when you're in the library, each shelf of the library becomes a lesson in historiography. It becomes a lesson in the unfolding of a field. So if you were interested in Germany, Nazi Germany, you'd make your way over to the German history section. And again, you'd see the older books, and you could tell by their condition sometimes. But you also see the newest books, the latest scholarship, and you can see how extensive it is. So if you have a course like Nazi Germany and the Holocaust, you have the books that feed into that class. Or if you teach one of my classes, African Studies, you know that when I started in 1985, there might have been 2 sections, right, on Africa. And now there are 3 full sections that are all about the African continent, the unfolding of African history, current political transformations in Africa. So the librarians are always adding to the collection, picking the best that's out there, getting input from students, getting input from teachers, but also making the kinds of necessary decisions so that you have what a lot of people think is really a small college library, right? That is absolutely stellar in what it can deliver to the student body. That's what I got to say. Thank you.
Thank you.